Hello, welcome to the New Stack Makers, a podcast where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. Hey, it's Alex Williams, the New Stack, here today with Jim Ford, Chief Architect, Global Product and Technology. Wow, it sounds so fancy. Jim is with ADP. And Jim is someone I've known since Seattle DockerCon, maybe even before that. It was the joint event in the Container Summit event. Yeah, in Vegas, and I was like, oh boy, here we go. I think this is gonna be fun talking with this guy, and it has been fun over the past 2 years or so. And I'm a big fan of Jim, and so I'm really glad to have you on the show. The topic is something you presented at DockerCon, and I love this title, Beyond Chicken Nuggets, 1 year and 1,000 plus containers at ADP. Tell us about the title, and then maybe get into and then we can go through the presentation. And for all of you out there, this will be on YouTube, and so we'll actually see the presentation with the audio if you want to take a look.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny, Alex. The name came about for kind of a bizarre reason. You may recall at DockerCon back out in Seattle, our CTO at the time, Kate Fulton, got 30 minutes on the day 2 keynote where he talked about how ADP was working on adopting containers because every company is a software company and you never know if you're going faster or slower than the guy next to you. And he was saying how, containers were like chicken nuggets, but the problem is ADP had chickens. And that became the tagline that everybody kept yelling at him for the rest of the conference. He became known for chicken nuggets. So it was really kind of humorous. So when we were looking for the title, because Docker wanted to follow up on that keynote and have, what's gone on since then in the use case track, we kind of came up with a couple of different titles, and I had jokingly suggested we'll call it Beyond Chicken Nuggets. And my coworker, who actually does a lot of the infrastructure work, said, how about 1 year and 1,000 plus containers at ADP? And then the Docker support folks came up with, why don't you just put them together?
Yeah, why not?
So, yeah, it was a lot of fun to have that as the title. And we can just roll through here pretty quickly,
Cool.
The basic premise is, how did we get here and how are we going? And, I started out, as you can imagine, with the quick recap over who's ADP. And, that ADP's, got 35 million users, 630,000 clients, that we do human capital management. And for some reason, people think it's a good place to work, and and what we really do, we say human capital management. Well, what the heck is that? And it's really the recruiting to the retirement. It's all the people management that goes along with managing, time and labor, benefits, performance reviews. All those things that small companies probably don't do, but all the big companies do in order to be compliant and be thorough.
Mm-hmm.
And I always challenge people to remember that if you had a bad performance appraisal, don't blame the software. It really wasn't our fault. We only enabled the process. Don't blame the pipe. The whole premise is that in a company like ADP, you have grown-up challenges. You have the challenges that come from having a lot of clients and a lot of products. We run over 150 products in production, which makes our life interesting in many respects.
Mm-hmm.
We have numerous versions concurrently out there. We have clients who aren't necessarily ready to upgrade or have secondary integrations that are problematic. What I argued was we suffer from acquisition-induced multi-architecture syndrome. You buy a lot of stuff over time. It's not always the same. It's always going to be, we're going to roll up the tail of legacy and move it all together. But ultimately, you're supporting a lot of different models because everybody builds stuff a little bit differently. So we have a little bit of an urban sprawl problem because we do have redundant code. We do have redundant services. And it's sometimes a challenge, even on simple services like logging and the like, to get folks to go back and change what they've done for the last 100 years. So, it's really about how do we create developer velocity, and that's really where we see containers being useful to us.
It becomes a workload issue, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, it becomes a one-arm paper hanger problem. The real goal that I see is if we can get some of the benefits out of containerization and get some of the automation and change some of the build semantic and how we get stuff, moved along without configuration drift. Those fingers on keyboards kill us every time, so that's always the challenge. So, in the first year, the year before we got to the DockerCon last year, we've done a bunch of whiteboarding. We've gone and talked to the Pivotal guys a bunch of times. We had a small group out at DockerCon in 15 out in San Fran. And, we were looking at how do we go? Do we want a full opinionated pause? What do we want? And the problem we have is we really don't have apps that are going to fit in 12-factor anytime soon. And we need to figure out how we're going to evolve not just our greenfield work where we're innovating and building, new cloud native stuff. We got to figure out what we're doing between here and there to make sure that we survive all the way to that point, if you will, where that stuff's real. So, Pivotal was a little too opinionated. We're really not going to be 12-factor. We kind of went on. We had our architectural review. We started to play with Docker on OpenStack because we decided we had to put Docker in containers because, Docker's dangerous.
Yeah.
And it's really kind of humorous because the more you talk about it and the more you talk to people, you realize that Docker on its face is not dangerous. It's generally much more secure than a lot of the VMs you have out there today.
Mm-hmm.
And with some of the announcements from week before last, it gets even more secure.
Mm-hmm.
I was really happy with how they used the unikernel guys to go in and do the shrink to fit stuff.
Right.
And I'm challenging Docker to go a step further.
Okay.
I want them to go beyond vulnerability scanning on the image level, and I want them to start doing it at the assembly level. So if my whole compose file, my whole assembly of containers, tell me what's really at risk and do the big XOR based on what I'm exposing and how I'm using it.
That could be a Moby project almost, couldn't it?
It could be, but I haven't really had the time to get up to speed on Moby entirely.
Right.
But it seemed to me that the unikernel guys, with the way they did shrink to fit, should be able to figure out how to work, this vulnerability doesn't matter because that port's not exposed in this part of the compose. And,
So for people out there, maybe you could explain that concept of shrink to fit.
Well, what shrink to fit did was there's a new phase in the build of a Docker container where Docker now allows you as one of the build steps to say, go back and rebuild this from minimum. And basically you lose all the superfluous code. In a Linux distribution today, there's 20 million lines of code. You probably need about 3 million of them to run any given program. The real trick is to know which 3 million you need. And it varies from program to program. So you can't just say, oh, here's my image necessarily. So what Docker does is it kind of goes through and looks at the code you're running and the processes you're running, looks at what's actually initialized and utilized, and then eliminates that quote-unquote drag-along extra. From a security standpoint, that's huge because you don't have all that extra threat surface. In normal Linux, you have 20 million lines of threat surface. In a shrink-to-fit container, that may shrink down to 1/10 of that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Want to make sure I'm getting clear.
You are.
So we were paranoid. We ran OpenStack to put Docker in safe little containers on containers on containers, and we cursed our way into oblivion. We got our proof of concept up. Our proof of concept was something called our notice resolution service. We file taxes for a lot of those clients that I mentioned earlier, and sometimes there's a discrepancy between what we filed and what the state or federal agency expected. So they send us a notice for resolution. You gave us $3, you should have given us $5. We think you're wrong. And there's a whole process that ADP goes through to argue back and forth who was right, who was wrong, and then correct the amount if need be. The way we got those in the past was, email or via snail mail, via fax, almost 100 different ways, really yucky ways.
You were getting help from Manuel.
Exactly. So to help Manuel get some spare time, what we built was a small service that plugged into our mobile application that allowed you to upload a photograph of that notice, and it also tagged it with metadata about what client and what user gave it to us. And it made Manuel have some spare time to actually work on what it said rather than figuring out who it said it about.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, it was a nice small proof of concept that was not mission critical. It was kind of an add-on on the side, which gave us the confidence to put it in a container early and not worry about it. So as you know, last June, we were out at DockerCon 16, and Keith Fulton was up on the stage talking about our commitment to Docker Data Center, and we launched into it in a serious manner. And Keith came up and talked about, as we talked about earlier, the chicken McNuggets versus chickens problem. And his other great analogy that resonated that day was the big tubs of ice cream and how you scoop functionality out of the big tub like the monolith and put it into little containers like cones. So I chose to go with the space shuttle analogy in this slide deck just to make it fun. So it's a kind of a once up and around kind of a thing. So, in the last, 12 months, 11 months, we've grown quite a bit. November of last year, we were about 600 engines and we were about 1,000 containers. As of the DockerCon, we were down to 469 engines, but we were up to 3,700 containers.
Okay.
So we think we're at scale. We have Docker kind of everywhere. We still have it in VMs. We have it on Z-Linux mainframes. We have it on bare metal. We have it on-prem. We have it on AWS. And we're participating in the beta with Microsoft and Docker on doing it for Win 16 on Azure. So we're all over the place, man. We got Docker everywhere.
Why did it go down from 600 to 469?
It's mostly just deployment as we start to go from VMs to bare metals. And we start to pack a little bit differently as we change the hardware and software available. It's not necessarily an indication of efficiency gains or performance. It's more about the plant that we were using, the physical plant, and how we were shifting the amount of CPU and memory we had in each of our nodes. So
now you've gone from 1,000. So you got 1,000. You basically tripled since from November 2006. No,
in 6 months.
Yeah.
In 6 months, we almost tripled.
Yeah,
and it's not slowing down. Part of what we've been doing is we've been pushing it into more of our CI/CD, and we're trying to get full automation where on check-in into Bitbucket, we go ahead and build all the way out and through, and give that immediate feedback to the developer that you broke it or you didn't break it. The challenges of long latencies on compile cycles. You end up with the guy forgetting why he did what he did before he knows he broke it.
Are you using any number of CI/CD environments?
Well, we're using them kind of elastically. They spin up and tear down based on, we're using Jenkins to drive all that.
Okay.
We'll get to that. We'll show you some more a little further in the deck.
Great.
So, we kind of found that it's easier to pull, and it's odd because I do have a title in enterprise architecture. I do, in theory, do the thou shalt thing about what you should and shouldn't do as a developer or a product builder. But realistically, we've always found that pushing standards kind of doesn't work. So it's a lot easier when the developers start to form a consensus and you can pull the standard out of that consensus. So when you look at Docker, it wasn't that we said, gee, wouldn't containers be cool? It was that originally the developers started doing it and yelling about it because of their frustration with full VM emulation on their laptops and desktops. They were doing Vagrant and VirtualBox and other things like that, and it was so heavy that they weren't able to do the work they wanted to get done. And when Docker came along with this great way to make it simple, they really started to get into it from the dev side. So it was a lot easier for us to, get in front of it and help them make it, actionable all the way to prod, than to come in late and say, okay, what are we going to do?
Right.
There are some challenges. We have challenges in the security scanning space because it seems like all the tools are still making a lot of noise, but not producing a lot of knowledge. I'd rather have light than heat. And this is a case where there's a lot of friction because the devs don't want to see a lot of noise, and the security vendors don't want to make sure they show you a lot of output to prove their value.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes problematic. They keep thinking we have superhumans who can go through 100,000 lines of output and know, oh my gosh, this one matters. People glaze very quickly. So you got to think about who's the user and who's that human who's supposed to figure out what to care about. You need the vendors who are building in the machine learning and the extra knowledge to help tell you what's truly anomalous or what's truly important.
That's the critical thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely, and that's why I was talking about the idea of the giant XOR, where you kind of overlay what the assembly is and tell me, no, you don't care about that CVE on the database server because you don't expose that port, you don't use that service, you don't do whatever, by doing that same kind of code trace.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to do what I call Agile EA. We're trying to figure out how you run safely with scissors. I think it was Brian Cantrell said that one of those containers.
Yeah.
He made the comment about if you wait for a technology to get to where you're comfortable with it, you're probably late.
Yes.
I'm sorry, you were going to say?
I was thinking of Brian Cantrell when you were talking. I mean, you brought up tracing, for example, right? And the running with scissors is a Brian Cantrell-ism.
Well, I didn't say anything about killing kittens, though, did I?
Mm-mm.
Because I won't do a full Cantrell for you. I'm sorry.
I'll wait for that later in the presentation. Remember the next one. We'll get Brian on here with us and we can talk.
That would be a lot of fun.
Yeah,
we should certainly do that. So I think we need to avoid unnecessary complexity. I get a little bit worried as vendors, Docker or any of or Mesos or whoever start to build too much into their ecosystem or into their base. And I think the whole containerd thing was very helpful to help avoid that fork.
Right.
But I kind of feel like you have to watch out for the proprietary solutions. You don't want to get in too deep. You want to try to use the standards where they're appropriate, like the OCI standard and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you, by the way, that the announcements this year around Linux Kit and around InfraKit and around all the Moby stuff and the theoretically Lego orientation of this stuff seems to be very attractive and kind of game changing. Mm-hmm. But I think it'll take us the next 12 months to digest it and figure out what it really did for us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because you remember on OpenStack, it was a bad thing when everybody started building their own flavor.
Right.
With Moby, don't we run the risk of everybody building their own flavor of? Well, never mind.
Yeah.
So you don't want to limit your toy box too early on in the process.
Right.
You want to go ahead and look at things and see what really fits. Play with Mesos, play with Joy and Triton, play with Kubernetes. Play with Docker. Figure out which of these things works for your workload and works for your ecosystem. And then ride it as far as it'll take you. And as long as you stick to things like the OCI container standard, if you ride one a certain distance and it fails you, you can pivot to the other because those images are truly portable. I was talking the other day with one of our guys, and I was saying, well, let's say we considered standing up Kubernetes. What would you use for your imaging authoring? It seems to me that Docker has the only tool set for making the images easily. So even if you were going to use a different deployment target, it seems to me at the current state of the tooling and the current state of the ecosystem, you would go ahead and still use a big chunk of Docker to even run the containers on the other substrates. So we were talking a little bit about my desired end state, and I guess I'm a little bit kind because I call out some vendors, and some of them we actually don't use entirely yet, but we're working toward it. This is mostly conceptual still. But basically what we're talking about is, how do you deal with trust in the world where you take software from the public internet without really knowing who you're taking it from?
Right.
And even taking it from Docker Inc., the big D Docker, doesn't make a 57,000 employee, $11 billion company feel like they're safe and effective when these 320 guys say, no, trust us, this stuff's safe.
Yeah. It's all good. It's all good.
It's all good till it's not all good. So, we need to work out how do we get to where we're comfortable for ourselves. So part of that is saying, we have like a pre-DIT, and DIT for us is development integration test, where we allow the engineers to, go out to the public internet, bring stuff in from whitelisted external repos, decide what it is that they need to go ahead to build what we're doing. And then run it through our process to scan it through like a black duck or a white source or somebody, bring it into our own artifactory so we can make sure that we don't have dependence on potentially disappearing resources out on the public net, and go through some kind of a surveillance and scoring kind of scan, not just for CVEs, but maybe for behavior as well. Kind of a little bit of NSA paranoia maybe in the DIT, FIT, and IPE space to understand the behavior. And are you seeing things that you shouldn't see? Is that new library you installed calling out to Mother Russia to a command and control server? Things of that nature.
Or other places.
Well, exactly. I don't mean to pick on Russia.
No, I was going to make a joke, but I won't.
But, regardless, you need to go ahead and understand whether or not, you go from unknown to untrusted, but now it's sort of known. And you're surveilling it, you're getting comfortable with it. And if you get to the point where, in a perfect world, I want a risk score to come out of these tools, and then have my automation decide based on the risk score and the percent change potentially, whether or not it can automatically sign and promote to production, trying to get to a fully automated pipeline. At the moment, that's a little bit tough because we have a policy around pen testing before release, and typically our ethical hack is about 2 weeks long. So I don't know how you put a 2-week manual process into an automatic pipeline.
Wow. So but
we'll get it.
Yeah. So you earlier you talked about the number of Docker engines that you have now in production.
No, not just production, across all environments.
Across all environments. Okay, across all environments.
Yeah, well, let's be fair here.
Okay. So across all the so did you have this in place before?
We have the DIT and FIT and IPE, which is performance test. We had staging production. We had normal environments for our SDLC still. So those are all the lower environments, the ones that would be in the untrusted zone, are all served from one common Docker cluster or swarm, where the production environments are more segregated by line of business and things of that nature at the moment.
Okay.
Well, we're running, I think it's around 30-some swarms. Yeah, I know. Paranoia will destroy you.
Well, you're running Swarm. Do you run any other orchestrators?
At the moment, we're not. When we made the commitment to Docker back last year, we basically said we're going to use their enterprise Docker Data Center or Docker Enterprise Edition to get as much lift out of their engineering as we could, and we would take it as far as it would take us. And we haven't hit a point yet where it's starting to let us down. We're talking about doing some comparative proof of concepts with Kubernetes and seeing if it's time to bring it in or not. But we're still growing, and so far Docker's tooling is working for us.
Okay.
I have a theory that the public cloud is slowly going to see its peak because they've already done all the engineering, and now any schmuck like you or I can stand up our own cloud on our own server under our own desk. Because they've already done all the hard work.
So you could run a cloud on your own server. Why wouldn't you run it on AWS instead?
Well, it depends on when you get to a certain point. My general feeling around AWS is I'm paranoid with moving too much data there.
Right.
We have 100 petabytes of data. I can't imagine how you get it back out if you ever move it in.
Right. The data protection is the critical thing there.
Right. And then the question becomes, why are you paying Amazon? You're paying Amazon for the bursty scalability and infrastructure. If you're already currently running, let's say, 10,000 VMs, if you were to turn around and turn those VMs into Docker engines or turn the bare metals into Docker engines, how much capacity would you have before you needed to spend a dime? It strikes me that, you probably could become more elastic in your own data center at a price point below Amazon's if you were committed to doing so.
Right, if you're committed, right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
We're schizophrenic. We're on Amazon, we're on Azure.
Right.
And we have 2 Class 4 data centers.
And that's the story these days. That's a story we hear a lot, right?
Yeah, and that's going to be that way for the foreseeable future, I would say. Mm-hmm. So anyway, containers do work for monoliths. People keep saying that, containers are for microservices. There are some challenges with monoliths, but in the end, the only difference between a microservice and a monolith is, still an API is an API is an API. A lot of these things you're interacting through the API. So do you care what's servicing that API? You need to go down the encapsulate and isolate route to get where you want to go. But to get there, you kind of got to get, as you work with containers, to automate everything. You need to, stop patching, start replacing. In our case, we build public and run private. Other people may build private and run public. Experiment. I'm talking a lot about Docker and containers, meaning Docker Enterprise, but I have several groups that are running Mesos. I have guys who are running Docker non-enterprise. Everyone's playing with something in a different area for a different reason.
Yeah.
And, the main difference in how we differentiate this is we provide an enterprise service from our hosting organization for Docker Enterprise today. If you want to run Mesosphere, you're running it on your own. We'll give you the VMs, but we're not managing it.
Right.
So, but eventually we're going to get back to saying, gee, it makes more sense to run on one, or maybe we get enough Mesos to say, hey, we need to support both, or maybe we all meet on Kube. Who knows? The future's not clear, is it?
No, unfortunately.
So anyway, so you work to disrupt yourself. You don't want to get too crazy. We have innovation labs in New York and Alpharetta and out in LA. Experiment, use them all. Use Triton, Joint. Would love you to come use Triton. Use Mesos. Use container service on AWS. Play with Kube. I believe strongly in encapsulate and isolate and getting into containers. Don't sweat the orchestrator too much. Getting into container mindset, getting this stuff in is better.
That seems to be something that is apparent as I watch this presentation, is that you've really focused on getting into that container mindset. Absolutely,
because in the end, we're really interacting with APIs because historically we've had 3-tier architectures where your UI tier has some business logic in it. As you separate that out and put it behind the API, so it's shareable between mobile and shareable between web and shareable between IoT or whatever, the UIs become so disposable that it's all about how do you get that API, how do you make it available for that consumption through the multi-channel, multifaceted aspect, and stop getting too hung up on the details. We spend too much time engineering stuff for our own good.
So then that relates to why you view APIs as that enablement for for enabling those microservices as an example.
Right. Well, it also gives you opportunities to build vertical niches and other things. I'm not sure you're aware or not, but ADP has a marketplace where people can build third-party apps now to integrate into the ADP ecosystem. If you go to developers.adp.com, you can find a whole write-up on the APIs we expose publicly and what you can build using our data and our clients and sell to them. If you have a great idea for how to do timekeeping better than we do, or if you have a great idea on how to do talent better than we do, we welcome you to go ahead and build it out.
So is that app platform a container-based architecture now?
Not yet. There are parts of it that are, but I can't say in good conscience that it's universally container. It'll get there.
Will you enable then the microservices for those third-party clients?
In essence, that's what it would be. Depending on what the services are, most likely you're going to end up consuming multiple of our microservices because we'll expose higher level like worker type attributes or other type of abstracted APIs to the partner and hide some of the complexity of our ecosystem behind that API. We do have 140 some products.
How old's ADP?
Well, it's 60 some years. I think it's 65 years old.
Wow.
It started out in a garage in Hasbrook Heights, New Jersey with a 4381. Do you remember what a 4381 is, Alex?
I want to make some reference to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Well, yeah, it actually is kind of what you get when you multiply 6 by 9. I'll go with that.
Hey, so where do you guys go from here?
Well, part of it is trying to figure out how do we build a better compliance pipeline on top of this so that we can let stuff run freely and not be blocked by compliance issues, trying to get to where they kind of all run more like a river rather than a turbulent stream. Get rid of the rocks and the eddies, if you will. And hopefully we can get to where we're feeding those kinds of issues if they surface back in as defects rather than as blockers. Also working on getting better automation coverage. There's an odd virtuous circle here. As we're building more and more Docker and elasticity in our house, the practices we're doing to get there, such as the automation and the automated test and the automated deploy and the various pieces, also happen to support a public cloud strategy should that become appropriate.
Oh, okay.
Well, you got to think about it. You don't want to go to the public cloud or to a hybrid cloud if you're still deploying manually, do you?
No.
You're going to hate yourself in the morning if you do. So, a lot of these.
I did that again.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of these, automate everything kind of pushes and these ideas around, how do we get this to be a fully, scored, surveilled, and nearly lights out beyond the developer writing the code part. Helps us not only with ourselves, but also for anything that comes next. All that stuff has to happen as table stakes if you were going to go into a really opinionated 12-factor type of play. So you can't tell people go to 12 factors. You tell them, hey, can you give me these 3? Great. Now, how about these next 3?
Right. Well, James, thank you so much for taking some time to show us what you're doing, what you guys have accomplished with containers, and it speaks to a transformation story that is always of interest to us. So thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure. Anytime. If you want an update when appropriate, we can go round again, my friend.
Perfect. Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Makers at thenewstack.io/podcast. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.